I stood frozen in the boardroom as my father slammed the quarterly report onto the mahogany table. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the silent room. Every executive around us held their breath, eyes darting between Walter Aldridge and me. His face twisted with contempt as he leaned forward, his voice dripping with disgust. "This is why I said you're not ready for leadership, Evelyn. You think feelings run a company." My hands trembled in my lap. I had spent weeks on that report, analyzing every detail, presenting solutions that could save us millions. But none of that mattered now. He pushed a stack of papers across the table toward me. Termination documents. My own father was firing me in front of everyone I worked with. "Your reckless empathy cost us the Henderson contract. Effective immediately, you're removed from this position." The pen scratched against paper as he signed my dismissal. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could. I stood on shaking legs, gathered what little dignity I had left, and walked toward the door. His final words followed me like poison. "You'll come crawling back, Evelyn. You'll see." I sat in my car in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Tears blurred my vision, making the building in front of me look like a watercolor painting bleeding in the rain. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from coworkers. Pity messages. Sympathetic words that meant nothing because nobody had stood up for me in that room. 20 minutes passed before I could breathe normally again. I looked up at the fifth-floor window where I knew he stood, probably watching me with satisfaction. The great Walter Aldridge, destroying his own daughter to prove a point about weakness and strength. I started the engine and drove away without looking back. But as I merged onto the highway, something shifted inside me. The tears dried. My jaw tightened. He wanted me to crawl back broken and defeated. He expected me to prove his point about women not belonging in his world. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Not now. Not ever. Growing up, I worshipped my father. Every summer, I followed him to the office, watching him command rooms full of powerful men. Walter Aldridge built his logistics empire from nothing, and I wanted to be just like him. I studied his strategies, memorized his speeches, and dreamed of the day we would run the company together. But even as a child, I noticed the way he dismissed my questions. When I asked about shipping routes or client relations, he would pat my head and say business wasn't a place for feelings. I thought he meant I needed to be tougher. I didn't realize he meant I didn't belong at all. My mother tried to warn me. She saw the way he belittled my achievements, how he never attended my school presentations or celebrated my academic awards. But I made excuses for him. He was busy building something important. He would notice me eventually. I graduated top of my class in finance. He didn't come to the ceremony. Instead, he sent his assistant with a card that read, "Now the real work begins." I thought that meant he was finally ready to take me seriously. I worked at Aldridge and Sutton Logistics for 6 years before that final boardroom humiliation. 6 years of arriving first and leaving last. 6 years of handling accounts nobody else wanted and turning them profitable. 6 years of watching less qualified men get promoted over me. The night I landed the Anderson shipping contract, I stayed until midnight preparing the presentation. $3.2 million in guaranteed revenue over 5 years. It was the biggest deal our division had seen in a decade. I walked into my father's office the next morning with the signed papers, expecting at least an acknowledgement. He glanced at the contract and tossed it aside. "Nathan did good work setting this up." Nathan hadn't even been in the final meetings. But 2 weeks later, Nathan got the promotion I had been working toward. My father announced it at the company dinner, praising Nathan's business instincts and leadership qualities. I sat at the back table, invisible. That night, I went home and cried until I had no tears left. Then I made a decision. I would confront him. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday morning. I knocked on his office door at 7:30, before anyone else arrived. He looked up from his coffee, annoyed at the interruption. "We need to talk about the promotions," I said, closing the door behind me. "There's nothing to discuss. I've outperformed everyone in my division for 3 years straight. You keep passing me over for men with half my results." He set down his cup slowly. "You want respect, Evelyn? Earn it the hard way, without writing on my name." The irony was suffocating. I had been trying to prove myself without his help for years, but his shadow followed me everywhere. Before I could respond, he stood and walked to the window. The Henderson deal fell through because you got emotional about their labor practices. Business isn't about morals. It's about profit. I saved us from a lawsuit. You cost us a client. He turned to face me. Maybe this isn't the right place for you. Within 3 days, he had arranged my termination. He blamed me for the Henderson situation in a company-wide email, painting me as incompetent and soft. Then he signed the papers and had security escort me out. The first month after my firing felt like drowning. Friends who worked in the industry stopped returning my calls. Recruiters told me they couldn't help someone with my reputation. My father's influence reached everywhere, closing doors before I could even knock. I burned through my savings paying rent on an apartment I could no longer afford. Job applications went unanswered. The few interviews I managed to get ended the moment they saw my last employer. Walter Aldridge's daughter, the one who couldn't cut it in the real world. I started applying to positions far below my qualifications. Reception jobs. Administrative assistant roles. Anything to keep the lights on. Finally, a small freight startup called me back. They needed someone to help organize their shipping schedules. The pay was barely minimum wage, but I took it. On my first day, I showed up in the business suit I used to wear to executive meetings. The owner, a kind man in his 50s, looked at my resume with confusion. You're overqualified for this position. I just need a chance, I said quietly. He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. All right, let's see what you can do. His name was Sam Cooper, and he saved my life without knowing it. While other managers might have taken advantage of my desperation, Sam treated me with respect. He noticed when I reorganized the filing system to save time. He listened when I suggested route optimizations that cut fuel costs by 15%. You've got something special, he told me after 3 months. People trust you. That's rare in this business. Sam had worked in logistics for 30 years. He understood shipping routes, client relations, and workforce management better than most executives I had known. But more importantly, he understood people. He saw potential where others saw problems. Under his mentorship, I stopped trying to prove myself and started actually working. I helped negotiate contracts with smaller clients. I solved scheduling conflicts that had plagued the company for months. Within 6 months, our revenue doubled. Word spread quietly through the industry. A small startup was suddenly competing with bigger firms, and people wanted to know why. Sam smiled when investors started calling. This is all you, Evelyn. You're ready for more. He introduced me to his network, people who valued results over reputation. Within a year, I had offers from 3 different companies. I chose a small logistics firm looking to expand. They offered me a partnership under one condition. I would work under a different name to avoid my father's shadow. I agreed immediately. I became Evelyn Hart, a name borrowed from my mother's maiden name. It felt strange at first, like wearing someone else's skin. But it also felt like freedom. For the first time in my professional life, people judged me on my work, not my last name. The logistics firm, Morrison Transport, was struggling when I arrived. Poor management, outdated systems, and a reputation for missed deadlines. I spent the first 3 months just understanding their problems. Then I started fixing them. I renegotiated contracts with reliable carriers. I implemented tracking software that gave clients real-time updates. I hired people based on competence, not connections. Within 18 months, Morrison Transport went from losing money to becoming profitable. Industry publications started noticing. They called me the turnaround specialist, the consultant who could revive dying companies. My phone rang constantly with offers, and I took the ones that challenged me most. Each success taught me something new. Each company showed me different weaknesses in the logistics industry. I studied market trends, learned from failures, and built a network of investors who believed in long-term strategy over quick profits. And sometimes late at night, I would search for news about Aldridge and Sutton Logistics. The articles grew more concerning each year. Outdated management. Lost contracts. Declining reputation. 5 years after my firing, I attended an industry conference in Chicago. I had been invited as a keynote speaker to discuss modern logistics strategies. As I waited backstage, I overheard two executives talking near the coffee station. Did you hear about Aldridge and Sutton? They lost the Berkshire account. Third major client this year. Walter Aldridge refuses to modernize. Still runs the company like it's 1980. Someone said they're bleeding money. Might not last another 5 years. I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated. The empire he built on ego and outdated thinking was crumbling. But another part of me, the little girl who once idolized him, felt sad. After my speech, an investment banker approached me. His firm specialized in acquiring struggling companies and turning them around. He handed me his card. We're always looking for someone with your expertise, Miss Hart. If you're ever interested in a bigger challenge, call me. I pocketed the card and thought about kingdoms that refused to adapt. About empires built on pride instead of progress. About men who believed their way was the only way, even as the world changed around them. Over the next 5 years, I built something my father never could. A reputation based on integrity. Companies sought me out not because of my name, but because I delivered results while treating people with respect. I rescued failing businesses by listening to workers, modernizing systems, and making ethical decisions that prioritized long-term stability over short-term profit. I studied my father's industry weaknesses from a distance. Aldridge and Sutton continued declining, losing clients to more innovative competitors. The reports were always the same. Outdated practices. Poor employee morale. Management that refused to adapt. Each failed quarter felt like another lesson. This was what happened when you built an empire on control instead of trust. When you valued dominance over collaboration. When you believed feelings had no place in business. I learned the opposite. The companies I saved thrived because I listened to people. Because I made decisions that considered more than just profit margins. Because I understood that long-term success required treating employees, clients, and partners with respect. My investment portfolio grew. My network expanded. And slowly, carefully, I prepared for the opportunity one knew would eventually come. The phone call arrived on a Tuesday morning, 10 years after my father fired me. Miss Hart, we have a unique opportunity. The voice on the phone belonged to Thomas Blackwell, the investment banker I had met years ago in Chicago. A prominent logistics firm is for sale. They're in trouble, but the infrastructure is solid. With the right leadership, it could be salvaged. What company? I asked, though something in his tone made my stomach tighten. I'll send over the preliminary information. This needs to move quickly. The current owners are desperate. The email arrived within minutes. I opened the attachment, expecting another struggling startup or regional carrier. Instead, I stared at a logo I knew as well as my own face. Aldridge and Sutton Logistics. My hands shook as I scrolled through the financial reports. The company was drowning in debt. Years of poor decisions and refused innovations had finally caught up. My father's empire, the business he valued more than his own daughter, was bankrupt. I closed my laptop and walked to the window of my office. The city stretched out below me, full of possibilities and second chances. Somewhere across town, my father sat in the same building where he had fired me, probably still believing his way was right. I picked up my phone and called Thomas back. I'm interested. Let's move forward. The acquisition process took 3 months. I worked through investment groups and shell companies to hide my involvement. The lawyers kept my real name out of every document. As far as anyone knew, a consortium of anonymous investors was purchasing Aldridge and Sutton to prevent its complete collapse. I read every file, every report, every contract my father had signed over the past decade. The picture that emerged was devastating. He had ignored safety concerns to cut costs. He had fired loyal employees to boost quarterly numbers. He had made decisions that prioritized his ego over the company's health. But he had also built something real. Beneath the corruption and mismanagement, there was still a solid foundation. Good people who believed in the work. Clients who wanted to stay if things improved. A brand that could be rebuilt. The board of directors agreed to the sale. My father, no longer in complete control, couldn't stop it. They scheduled a transition meeting where the new ownership would be introduced to senior management. Walter Aldridge would be required to attend. I prepared for that meeting like a general preparing for battle. I studied every detail, anticipated every question, and planned every word. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. About proving that empathy and integrity weren't weaknesses, but the foundation of lasting success. The morning of the meeting, I woke before dawn. I chose my outfit carefully. A navy suit, professional but not aggressive. My mother's pearl necklace, a reminder of the woman who believed in me when my father didn't. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone he would barely recognize. The boardroom was on the 5th floor of Aldridge and Sutton headquarters, the same floor where he had fired me 10 years ago. I arrived early and sat in the chair at the head of the table, the chair he used to occupy. Senior management filtered in, looking nervous and confused. They knew ownership had changed hands, but they didn't know who had bought the company. The chief financial officer, an older man named Herbert, nodded politely at me. "Will the new owners be joining us soon?" he asked. I smiled. "I'm already here." Before he could respond, the door opened. Walter Aldridge walked in, his shoulders slightly stooped, his face lined with stress I had never seen before. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of failure. He glanced around the room, then his eyes landed on me. For a moment, nothing happened. Then recognition dawned, and his face went completely white. "Evelyn." I gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Please sit down, Mr. Aldridge. We have a lot to discuss." The silence in that room was absolute. Every executive stared at my father, watching his face cycle through shock, confusion, and finally understanding. He gripped the back of the chair but didn't sit. "This is impossible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is it?" I opened the folder in front of me. "You're here for your termination review. As of today, you're no longer employed by Aldridge and Sutton Logistics." Herbert's sharp intake of breath was audible. The other executives exchanged glances. My father's hands trembled on the chair back. "You can't do this." "Actually, I can. I'm the majority owner. The board has already approved this decision." I slid a document across the table. "Your severance package is generous, more than you gave me when you fired me in this same room 10 years ago." He finally sat, but he looked like a man in a nightmare. "This is my company. I built this from nothing, and I'm going to rebuild it from the ruins you left behind." I kept my voice level, professional. "You have 1 week to remove your personal belongings. Security will escort you after this meeting." He looked around the table, expecting someone to defend him. Nobody did. These were the same people who had watched him fire me without saying a word. Now they watched him receive the same treatment with the same silence. The news spread through the logistics industry like wildfire. Walter Aldridge, the self-made king, had lost his empire to his own daughter. The daughter he had publicly fired and humiliated. The daughter he said would never succeed without his name. My phone exploded with calls from reporters, investors, and former colleagues. Everyone wanted the story, wanted to know how I had managed to come back from such a devastating betrayal. I declined most interviews, but I couldn't avoid the attention completely. Industry publications ran features calling me a business prodigy. My real story came out. How I had worked under a different name for years, building a reputation from scratch. How I had learned from every failure and turned struggling companies into success stories. How I had quietly assembled the resources to purchase the very company that had destroyed me. My father's allies abandoned him overnight. Investors who had stood by him for decades suddenly had nothing to say. His phone calls went unreturned. His name, once a symbol of power, became a cautionary tale about pride and outdated thinking. The company building still bore his name on the side. I ordered it removed and replaced with simply Aldridge and Sutton Logistics. Not erased, but changed. A symbol that this business was no longer about one man's ego. I threw myself into the work of rebuilding. The first thing I did was rehire every employee my father had unjustly terminated. People who had spoken up about safety concerns or challenged his decisions. People who had been punished for showing empathy or suggesting innovations. I called each of them personally. Some were skeptical. Others were angry. But most were willing to give the company another chance under new leadership. "I can't promise it will be easy," I told them. but I can promise you'll be treated with respect. Next, I modernized our systems. New tracking software, updated equipment, training programs for drivers and warehouse workers. I met with union representatives and listened to their concerns. I implemented safety protocols my father had ignored for years. The employees responded. Morale improved. Productivity increased. Clients who had left started reaching out, asking if the rumors of new management were true. Within 6 months, we stopped bleeding money. Within a year, we were profitable again. But I wasn't satisfied with just saving the company. I wanted to transform it into something better than my father had ever imagined. A business that proved empathy and profit weren't enemies, but partners. I worked 16-hour days, determined to prove that his way had been wrong all along. The deeper I dug into the company's files, the more disturbing things I found. Buried in old archives and forgotten storage rooms were documents my father had hidden. Contracts that cut corners on safety. Deals that cost workers their pensions. Decisions made purely to boost quarterly profits while devastating people's lives. One file in particular made me physically ill. 5 years ago, my father had closed a distribution center to save money, laying off 200 workers right before the holidays. He had promised them severance packages and pension transfers. The documents showed he had never followed through. Those families had lost everything while he pocketed the savings. I sat in my office late that night, reading through case after case of his corruption. This wasn't just about business anymore. It wasn't about proving him wrong or getting revenge for my own humiliation. This was about justice for every person he had hurt while building his empire. I called my legal team the next morning. "I want to make this right," I said. "Every worker who was cheated, every family that lost their pensions. I want them compensated." My chief counsel warned me it would cost millions. I didn't care. Some things mattered more than profit margins. I scheduled a press conference for the following month. The entire logistics industry tuned in, expecting an announcement about new contracts or expansion plans. Instead, I stood at the podium and told the truth. When I took over this company, I discovered systematic corruption that harmed hundreds of workers and their families. Previous management prioritized short-term profits over people's lives. That ends today. I outlined a comprehensive plan to compensate every worker who had been cheated. Pension restorations, back pay, and public apologies. I announced new oversight systems to prevent future abuses. And while I never mentioned my father by name, every reporter in the room connected the dots immediately. The backlash against Walter Aldridge was swift and brutal. Former employees came forward with their stories. News outlets ran exposés about his business practices. The man who had once been celebrated as a self-made success became a symbol of corporate greed. My phone showed 17 missed calls from his number. I didn't return any of them. This wasn't about punishing him anymore. It was about building something better. About proving that a company could be profitable and ethical. That leadership meant serving the people who depended on you, not exploiting them. 3 months after the press conference, my father showed up at my office unannounced. My assistant tried to stop him, but he pushed past her and stood in my doorway looking like a ghost. His suit hung loose on his frame. His face had aged years in just months. "You've made your point, Evelyn." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "What point would that be?" He sat heavily. "That you're better than me. That you won. I built this family's name, and you destroyed it." "No." I leaned forward. "You built a throne on other people's suffering. I built something that actually lasts. There's a difference. Everything I did was for this family. Everything you did was for yourself." My voice stayed calm, but years of pain leaked through. "You fired your own daughter to prove a point about weakness. You hurt hundreds of people to pad quarterly reports. You built an empire on ego, and it collapsed because ego isn't a foundation." He stood up, anger flashing across his face. "I made you who you are. No. You showed me who not to become." He left without another word, and I sat alone in my office for a long time afterward. There was no satisfaction in that conversation. No triumph. Just sadness for what could have been if he had been a different kind of man. The board of directors called a meeting to discuss the company's future. They wanted to know if I planned to rebrand completely, removing the Aldridge name from everything. Several members argued it was necessary to distance ourselves from the scandal. I listened to their arguments. They made logical sense. The Aldridge name carried baggage now, associations with corruption and failed leadership. A fresh start might be easier. But something held me back. This name represents more than one man's failures, I said finally. It represents every worker who built this company, every driver who delivered goods safely, every person who believed in doing good work. I won't erase that history. Instead, I propose keeping the name but redefining what it meant, making it a symbol of redemption rather than shame, proving that companies could transform, could learn from mistakes, and become better. The board agreed, though some members remained skeptical. I understood their concerns. This was the harder path, carrying the weight of the past while building toward a better future. But nothing worth doing was ever easy. That night, I called my mother. We hadn't spoken much over the years. His shadow had fallen between us too. But now, she listened as I explained everything. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "Not for what you accomplished, but for who you became while doing it." 6 months into my leadership, everything started falling apart again. One of my senior executives, a man named Gerard who had worked closely with my father, began acting strangely. Reports went missing. Meetings got rescheduled without explanation. Small sabotages that added up to significant problems. I had my IT department monitor his communications. What they found confirmed my worst fears. Gerard had been feeding insider information to our biggest competitor. Shipping routes, client lists, pricing strategies. Everything they needed to undercut us. When I confronted him in my office with the evidence, he didn't even try to deny it. "Your father reached out to me," Gerard admitted. "He wanted to prove you would fail. I owed him everything, so I helped." "You're fired," I said quietly. "And I'm pressing charges." Gerard laughed bitterly. "He won't stop. You humiliated him. He'll keep coming after you until this company crumbles. Then he'll be disappointed." I called security. Because I'm not going anywhere. After Gerard was escorted out, I sat alone and tried to process the betrayal. My father couldn't accept defeat. He would rather destroy what he had built than watch me succeed where he failed. But I had something he never understood. I had people who believed in this mission, who wanted to prove business could be done differently. My father's health began failing shortly after Gerard's arrest. I heard it through industry contacts first. He had suffered a minor stroke, brought on by stress and mounting legal troubles. The investigation into his past business practices had expanded, and he faced potential criminal charges. I didn't visit him in the hospital. Part of me wanted to be the bigger person and offer some gesture of compassion. But another part of me, the part that still remembered standing in that boardroom while he fired me, couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I focused on work. We secured 3 major contracts that month. Our safety record became the best in the industry. Employee satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. Everything my father said was impossible, I was proving could be done. One evening, my assistant told me a man had been sitting in a diner across from our building every day that week. An older man who just drank coffee and stared at our headquarters. When she described him, I knew immediately who it was. I grabbed my coat and walked across the street. The diner was small and worn, the same place my father used to take me as a child after work. I slid into the booth across from him. He looked up surprised, then ashamed. We sat in silence for a long moment. The diner hummed with life around us. Conversations at other tables, the clatter of dishes, the hiss of the coffee machine. Normal sounds from a world that felt very far away. "You got what you wanted," he said finally, his voice rough. I shook my head. "No, Dad. I got what you never gave me. Respect. But I never wanted it like this." He looked down at his coffee cup. His hands trembled slightly, whether from illness or emotion. I couldn't tell. "I built that company from nothing. Worked 70-hour weeks for 30 years. And you took it in a decade. You lost it yourself. I just bought what you destroyed. Because I didn't believe in you." It wasn't a question. He finally looked at me, and I saw something I had never seen before in his eyes. Regret. "You proved me wrong about everything." I wanted to feel triumphant. I wanted this moment to heal something broken inside me. But instead, I just felt tired. I wish it hadn't taken this to make you see that. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. But no words came out. What could he say? Sorry didn't cover years of belittlement. Apologies couldn't undo the pain he had caused so many people. I stood up. Take care of yourself, Dad. I left him sitting there and walked back across the street to a life I had built without him. A year later, I announced the establishment of a new scholarship fund. The Aldrich Foundation for Women in Business would provide full university tuition plus mentorship programs for young women pursuing careers in logistics and supply chain management. The announcement surprised everyone, especially when they learned I was funding it in my father's name. Board members questioned the decision. Why honor a man who had caused so much damage? Because every story deserves a chance at redemption, I explained. Even his. The foundation wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution for everything he had done. But it was acknowledgement that complicated people could leave complicated legacies. That we could take something broken and transform it into something meaningful. My father didn't attend the announcement ceremony. His health had deteriorated further, and he rarely left his apartment. But I sent him a letter explaining what I had done and why. He never responded, but I heard from others that he kept that letter on his bedside table. The first scholarship recipients were announced that fall. 20 brilliant young women who would never have to prove themselves the way I did, who would enter the business world knowing their worth from the start. That felt like victory. Not the hostile takeover or the public vindication, but this. Building a future where other daughters wouldn't face what I faced. I walk through the headquarters of Aldridge and Sutton Logistics every morning now. The building hums with productive energy. People smile when they see me. They stop to share ideas, to solve problems together, to build something we all believe in. In the main lobby, there's a wall of photos documenting the company's history. My father's image is there among the founders. Not erased, but contextualized. Part of a longer story that includes both failure and renewal. Beneath his photo, a new plaque reads, "Rebuilt with Integrity by Evelyn Aldridge." Sometimes I stand there and look at both our images side by side. I see the resemblance in our faces, the same determined jaw and focused eyes, but I also see the differences. In my photo, I'm surrounded by employees. In his, he stands alone. I've built something he never could. Not because I'm smarter or more talented, but because I understood what he refused to learn. That businesses are built by people, not profits. That leadership means service, not dominance. That the strongest foundations are made of trust and respect, not fear. He told me I would never make it without him. He was right, in a way. The woman I became was forged in the fire of his rejection. But I made it in spite of him, not because of him. And sometimes, silence is the loudest apology you'll ever receive.